All right, let's jump into 2010 problem number 5. A large pet store buys the identical species of adult tropical fish from two different suppliers, Buy Right Pets and Fish Friends. Several of the managers at the pet store suspect that the lengths of the fish from Fish Friends are consistently greater than the lengths of the fish from Buy Right Pets. Random samples of 8 adult fish of the species from Buy Right Pets and 10 adult fish of the same species from Fish Friends were selected, and the lengths of the fish in inches were recorded as shown in the table below. So we got all of that data. So it says, do the data provide convincing evidence that the mean length of the adult fish of the species from Fish Friends is greater than the mean length of the adult fish of the same species? So anytime it's asking us if we have convincing evidence or statistically significant evidence, we want to do a significance test. So first, we know that we have a two-sample mean t-test because we have two samples and they're dealing with means. And remember, a t-test goes with mean data. So that's the first thing you want to do, is write down what type of test you're dealing with, just like I did up here. Then the second thing, you want to identify your parameters. So what mean population 1 represents and mean population number 2. Now it doesn't, you could do it either way, but usually there's going to be a way that just makes a lot more sense with how you set up your hypotheses. Okay, so and especially for this problem, they're going between the order of Buy Rights and Fish Friends. So you could have done it either way, but I'm going to show you a way that kind of makes the most sense as you're going through and doing it. So let's go through the question. Do the data provide convincing evidence that the mean length of adult fish from Fish Friends is greater than Buy Rights? So if we're trying to do a greater than test, and Fish Friends needs to be greater than Buy Rights. So if Fish Friends is greater than Buy Rights, we subtract those two numbers, then we want to get a greater than sign, greater than 0, Fish Friend needs to come first. So that's why I labeled our population mean as Fish Friends, and then population 2 as Buy Rights, because when we subtract those, we're going to get a positive value. So it just lines up better with our alternative hypothesis. If you did the other way, your hypothesis would just be less than. You've gotten a negative, the same z-score or t-score value, except it's negative. So your p-value will come out the same in the end. But those are the only two things that would change. But that's the way I set it up because I feel like it's just a little bit more intuitive with how it should be in the context of the problem. So that's the first part, dealing with our hypothesis. Then next we have our conditions. Again, we're not doing the 10% condition. We just want to make sure our samples are random and independent. It tells us in the problem, so we check that one off. Number 2, we want to determine if it's normal. So since we're dealing with mean, we have to look through the problem first. And if it tells us it's normally distributed, we can just write that down. It doesn't tell us that. And the second thing we want to look at is our sample size. Sample size has to be 30 or above to fulfill the central limit theorem. As you can see, the sample sizes are 8 and 10, way below 30. So if we did not have the data points, then we wouldn't be able to go on with the test. But we do. So what we want to do is graph those points really quickly. Don't spend a ton of time on this because you can see it's a small part of this entire problem. You only have about 12 minutes to do these problems on the AP test. So you want to make sure you get these dot plots graphed well, but very quickly. So I graphed to two different samples. As you can see, they're approximately normal. Remember, as we're analyzing these dot plots, we're looking for very strong outliers or very strong skewness. We don't see either of those, so we're going to say both the impulses are approximately normal, so that checks out. So that's part 2, our conditions check out. So we can go on to calculate our z-score. So this is what you should have had plugged into your formula. The mean from Fish Friends minus the mean from Buy Rights. And then as we're doing our standard deviation formula, this first fraction is going to be from sample 1, which is Fish Friends, The second fraction is going to be sample number 2, which is Bayreuth. And when you calculate the numerator out, should come out to 0.06. Our denominator should come out to 0.2319. When we divide those, your t-score is going to come out to 0.2587. So again, we always want to make sure we're finding for these significance tests the tail values. So if we have a positive t or z-score, we want to find the right tail of the curve. If it was a negative z-score or t-score, we'd want to find the left side of the curve. Since this one's positive, the t-score is going to be our lower boundary. Our upper boundary is going to be positive 1,000. And then our degrees of freedom is going to be 7. Remember, there's a couple different ways that you can get degrees of freedom that are accepted. The way that we're going to do is just like the easiest one. You take your smallest sample size, which in this case is 8, and then we just subtract 1 from that. So we do 8 minus 1 to get our degrees of freedom. As you're writing your calculator command, make sure you just label your t-score and your degrees of freedom because that's what the AP graders are going to be looking for. When we do all of that, our p-value comes out to 0.4017. And I forgot to do it when I first did the problem, but I just did it now. You want to circle that p-value just to make sure it's really clear for the grader what your final p-value is. So then, going on to our interpretation, since we have such a high p-value, 40%, and that's above our significance level of 0.05, we do not have statistically significant evidence to reject the null hypothesis. In other words, we do not have evidence Fish Friends has longer fish than Bayreuth. Okay? We're not saying that for sure they don't, but we just don't have strong evidence that they do. Okay? So those are the 4 different components that you should have had on your test. So again, you should have gotten essentially correct for the hypothesis, and then part 2, the conditions, part 3 is the actual calculation, and then 4 is the interpretation. So if you got all those parts right, you've gotten 4 out of 4, full credit for that question on the AP test.